go over disaster shelter operations. For a little bit about me, my name is Chris McCall. I'm the preparedness coordinator at the York County EMA. We're based over in Alfred. I have a team of about 6 of us, including our director, Art. And overall, we oversee a lot of the different emergency operations in the county. We're here to help first responders, and we're also here to help local towns be prepared for any type of disaster that we may face. I'm going to go over just a little bit about the course, and then go into introductions right after that. I think first off, one of the big things about sheltering and Maine is that a lot of the times we kind of hear, oh, that really doesn't happen here, or people are just going to stay at home, they're not going to want to go to a shelter. And a lot of times that is true, but there still are the cases that has happened in the past, and we still believe that that's going to happen at least at some point in the future. The 2 photos here from the '98 ice storm. The picture up top was from the 2 of them being bused from Old Town to a shelter, and then below was the Colby College Fair House, I believe, or the Field House, sorry, where they housed people back in '98. So this is something that has happened, so it's really good that everyone here is taking the course today and trying to get active prepared for when that does happen in the future. So 2 main course objectives for today. I think first one, I want everyone to walk out of here with a general overview of the sheltering operations and general sense of the different roles you'd be asked to perform if the shelter opened and active. So that's point 1. Objective 2, I really want to get practice working with one another. If a disaster shelter opens here in Acton, you're going to be working with people you may not have worked before, and you're going to have to solve a lot of complex problems and issues that come up as part of shelter operations. So I want both of those 2 things today. I think we're on track to do that, so we'll leave here today with that being a success. Just a quick agenda, we'll do welcome introductions in a second. We'll go over some of the fundamental sheltering concepts to make sure you're aware of basics. Then talk about items such as establishing a shelter, establishing things such as supervision, oversight, and accountability. We'll talk a little bit about the operational and logistical side of shelters. We'll have a group activity at the end, and then questions wrap up. We'll be on with our evening. So, first order of business, I'd like to introduce the acting EMA director, Phil Caruso, who will give a bit of an introduction today.
I think I know everybody, or at least I do now. And we all know each other to some degree, relationships on boards or CERT team or whatever, which is great. And when I started this, I always knew that we would have a lot of volunteers. And so I want to thank you all. I'm not surprised at all. I know Tom McGurdy's still quite amazed because he mentions it all the time, but I'm not surprised at all. We've got a great variation of people that have different skills. And, of course, I work with Neil at the county communications team, and I always like to make sure I say thank you to folks like Andy and John at the school. When this first started, they helped me real quickly get our Red Cross shelter survey updated so that it was fully supported and not listed as independent. And they made that real easy. I spend a lot of time down at the county EMA in Alfred, to the point where they're locking the doors and they shouldn't be coming. So, but the amazing amount of cooperation and help from Megan and Art and Scott and Dave and Chris down there is incredible. To think that it's almost exactly 5 months ago when the town and I thought of doing this from scratch. And here we are, so it's pretty cool. It's real cool, actually. And we have 8 people that have literally volunteered, and they're all here, of course, 4 of which went through the CERT training at the county. Well, there's also 3 more of us from first class here. So our little town has 8 of 31 people that went through 2 classes. That's pretty impressive. I'm not surprised. We have people with a lot of shelter experience through the Red Cross, Mr. Sabelli. We have people with ServSafe certification, which comes in handy, and we're going to find out all the other things here when you folks introduce yourselves. Some people are friends and neighbors. Ray and I live next door to each other, and of course Bob and my wife and Leslie and him do things together as we do. So it's a real neat relationship. And again, I've gotten a lot of cooperation from everybody, including the select board and town administrator and all the department heads. So it's made it a lot easier. So thank you to everybody for that. So pretty much it. Anybody has any questions? At the end, real quick, when we're all done with this, I do have a task I was going to ask you, if the more people that are volunteering want to take it on, and I'll go over that later. If everybody says we don't want to do that, then I'll do it. But I think it would be interesting. So, thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And then also just wanted to introduce the director of York County EMA, Art Cleves. Just wanted to have him give a brief word because I know we like to inspire and everything we have.
Thank you very much. So I will not take very long because Chris has got 4 hours and 32 minutes of training for me tonight.
How do you like that?
So I'm looking a lot of time. But I want to be here tonight, especially to talk to this group, because this is a first. Director Crusoe has come into the job. He's already got the EOP in place, and the select persons are here, school officials here, volunteers are here tonight, and I can't tell you, this doesn't happen anywhere else. And Neil, our radio team leader, so this is a phenomenal accomplishment. So I want to be quiet and just follow through the instructions with Chris. And thank you very much. This is the first. Thank you. Yeah, this will be
Great. Thank you, Art. All right, so I want to hear a little bit about yourself. So just if you could introduce yourself and give a little bit of background, say if you've had any experience with sheltering. We'll go around the room and kind of learn a little bit about each other. All right, so.
You got a heck of a team here, Art.
amazing.
Yeah.
Just so you know, the emergency operations plan was finished, and I sent it yesterday to the select board for their first review. And one of the things in there, of course, talks about sheltering and warming centers. So just to let you know, because it's related to this class, that this building is designated as the primary warming and cooling center, which is easily, anytime I feel, or I make a suggestion to the select board or whoever, basically, if I feel it's needed, long power outages or whatever, this would be the first thing we would open for people just to come here if there's no power. It's 90 degrees, they need to get cooled off for a while, just come socialize because they're stuck in their house. Of course, in the winter, it's the opposite. And that's one of the places that we would, our volunteer time would be here with the folks and let them in. And, obviously, in that environment, you're not staying overnight. The secondary cooling and warming center, which the church behind us was so gracious to make an arrangement with me, is a secondary one if we ever needed it for various reasons. If this was unavailable, it was that many people, let's hope that never happens. But that is there for your information. And then, of course, the primary actual shelter is the school, and it has been allocated that way for many years. When I first started looking at this in December, I saw right away that it was listed as an independent shelter. Nobody knew why, but first thing I realized is that needs to change because we certainly can't put up a big shelter with the resources we have in this town. And so Red Cross met me here, this lady Tova, a young lady. I got a hold of the old survey. Andy and John at the school were amazing with the information they turned around with pictures, floor plans. Found a place where we could put pets within days. And we basically made the Red Cross and the mass carers out of Concord, New Hampshire redo that survey, designate us as a fully supported shelter by them, which is good, and get it all set up so now we know that's a fully supported shelter. Also, John at the time said that if we need to evacuate, which the ordinance gives us that authority to request, and hopefully it never happens, but it could, that he has 3 buses and drivers that are local that we could utilize to evacuate people to the school. So this is the kind of cooperation I've been getting all along. So just for your information, because it's related to what we're doing tonight, those are in the emergency operations plan designated that way. Of course, it follows the ordinance, so just to let you know.
Great. So, one thing at York County EMA that we say a lot is that all emergencies happen locally, and that's very, very true. Anytime an emergency happens first people you're going to turn to are your neighbors. And, you know, when I look across the room here, I mean, I would be very happy to live in Acton and know that I have neighbors like you all who have all this experience, you know, who really care about your community. That's a really, really big thing. And the other thing to think of is that, you know, your neighbors and your connections here in town are your resources. You know, there's a lot of talk sometimes about, oh, you know, if there's a disaster, what resources does the county have, or state, or FEMA? Like, some of your best resources are right here in the room with you. And even when it goes back to the objectives, and I was talking about, you know, making sure that you get time to work with one another, like, the experience that's sitting right here is 100 times more than the experience that's on these slides coming up. So really, you know, consider that, try to make those relationships while you can, and, you know, definitely something that will help you out and fill. I mean, like you said, you have a great team, so should be proud. So in that same spirit, we're actually going to move into our first group activity. So for the first breakout activity, I'm going to split you into the first two tables and the last table in the last section. I'm going to have you create shelter roles for each member of your team. I set that out in the pre-materials, but I have them listed here below. So in each of your teams, assign yourselves a role in the shelter. So we're going to need at least one of the following, and we can only have one shelter manager per group. I realize we're over 6 here, so for that other position, like, determine what you think would be needed. So you have 5 minutes, these two tables here, and then last table at the back. Hey everyone, time's up. Go back to our original place. All right. Very interesting to see. So I'm going to do a quick kind of like show of hands for all the positions. So who was the shelter manager for each team? Okay, that's great. Shift supervisor. Okay, great. Dormitory supervisor. Okay. Registration. Feeding. Perfect. And logistics and facilities. Okay.
Can I ask a question? Did you pick your roles at something that felt like natural to you, or that's what you did?
Yeah.
Yes, the appropriate answer.
That's exactly what I figured.
Listening to everybody's introduction, we figured out.
That's exactly, him and I had that conversation last week. I said, let's do the introduction and then watch what roles they pick, and I bet the introductions they heard of each other will determine that, and that's exactly what happened, so it's cool.
But Hope made a very good point that, you know, just because you're assigned to that, everybody's doing whatever needs to be done.
Cross training, you take it, everybody would be able to work. I mean, it's like, this would be one whole shift. That would be another whole shift, but everybody would be able to do.
Perfect. Were there any roles that were harder than others to fill? Figure out? No?
I think shelter manager was a little bit hard to fill because no one wanted to be the top tier, right? I certainly didn't want to be the top tier.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, one thing, so on the pre-course materials, there's one role I didn't include up here. Can anyone tell me what role that was?
Pass.
Okay. So the reason why that was is that for a role like that, definitely could be important, and after hearing the bios in this room, I believe there would be people to fill that out. The only reason I didn't have you do that is because it's one of those roles where we really need someone who's credentialed, has a background in that experience in order to be able to fulfill that role. It was, sorry, the role that's missing is the mental health supervisor or lead. So you know, it can be mental health slash medical service. Yeah, so some lead. Oh, you did? Okay.
And we have people who have experience, and we also thought of somebody we could volunteer.
Great, and that's perfect too, because I mean, a lot of these instances, yeah, you will need to rely on friends in your community and everything. So that's definitely a role that could be filled. The other reason why I did that is because if you're ever in a situation where you don't have that role filled, you know, again, there's going to be a lot of communication with the outside world in the sense of like us or other supportive people there. So if we know that you need that resource and that role isn't filled, and that's something that other people can help find that for you versus trying to just get somebody into that position because you need to fill that. But it sounds like everyone like organically came to these roles, so yeah, really interesting stuff. Any other insights anyone has or anything interesting
Yeah,
like they
I
came up
have
with
a comment on that. In a dire situation, an emergency situation like that, I mean, just the compassion of the people that are there. I mean, especially people that are willing to step up for that could also fulfill that role. I mean, empathy and compassion, I mean, especially in a dire emergency situation. I mean, you're gonna have, I would think you, I don't.
That's why we're all.
Noting that
That's
you
right.
never know how you're going to respond.
Right, and de-escalation training is going to be very important in that role for people who are maybe panicking and having some scenarios.
I think when you're faced with traumatic circumstances unfolding, you think you'll respond a certain way, and then you find yourself in that moment, and that might not be how you thought you were going to respond.
Yeah, and you're correct on that, but like, you will have to show, everyone in this room will have to show empathy of some kind, and, may have to step into a role where they're helping somebody. I think it's more of the differentiation of just knowing, hey, if there is somebody designated as that supervisor or lead when it comes to medical, when it comes to medicine, making sure that that person's qualified to do so, because sometimes, like, if we see on paper, let's say I'm up over in Alfred, the county EMA, and I see a whole list of people at the shelter, and I see that that role is filled, I may not think that you need extra help. Whereas if I see that that's empty, other people are trying to do what you can with what you're qualified to do, then, that's at least something we can try to get help in that case. So it's more of just like a kind of reminder for that. But all great points. So I guess, going into it with the sheltering concept, so, overall with these different things we'll go through, there's going to be a lot of content on the slides. I'm going to try to go over kind of the main points of that. Everyone here will get the slides, so you'll have time to review it, but the main thing is just trying to go over the key points and enable you to have as much time as possible to connect with each other and work on the group activity that's at the end. So if there are any questions, please interrupt me. That's completely fine. You'll want to make sure that you feel comfortable at least with what we're going through today. So fundamental sheltering concepts. What is sheltering? I think many of you in this room know that, but pretty much it's the provision of safe housing accommodations to anybody who's in need, typically after a natural disaster, but could be based on other disasters as well. It's necessary that we ensure the safety and well-being of those displaced. That's the key thing there. And why do we really need it? It's because it provides that essential service that can support people in a time of need and can also help with a lot of the long-term recovery as well. There's 3 types of congregate shelters. So congregate thinking is a group shelter setting that we'll talk about. The main one today we'll go over is really disaster shelters because a lot of what you'll learn there will prepare you for other shelters. But we have warming and cooling centers. So those are more like Phil said earlier, daytime, based off extreme temperatures usually. Evacuation centers, those are ones that are short-term places. Maybe you just need an hour or 2 evacuation from your home, a place for people to be comfortable until they're allowed back. And then we have the disaster shelters that are what we're here for today, which are overnight, provide a lot more expansion services. A good way to put that is kind of in this table here, like thinking warming and cooling centers and evacuation centers. Usually you can have a lot less people at that, maybe 2 to 3. Whereas when you're talking about these larger disaster shelters, that's where you do need more staffing, and also you provide more services. For example, in a warming and cooling center, you may just provide snacks or drinks or just cell phone charging. But when you get to the congregate or an emergency shelter, you're providing other things like 3 meals a day, dormitory space, showers, pieces where it's a little bit more of an expansive effort. So those are the key concepts. So establishing shelter. Before the storm, I mean, this is, this room kind of knows all about that. You're here today. But there are really 5 main things that you want to think about before the storm. So one is finding a facility. Luckily, Active has found that. Usually one with backup power generation is preferred, but you don't necessarily need that. But you have that here in Active, which is great. Second is performing a facility survey. So at least just understanding what's there at the facility, what's the layout, and where you're allowed to be. That's a key thing we'll talk a little bit about actually in the group exercise. 3, knowing the authorities and responsibilities. So understanding at the town level who has the authority to actually open up a shelter and who is responsible for undertaking the different parts of opening that shelter. 4, having an activation plan in the town EOP, or even better, a shelter plan for the town, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And then also, while we're here today, recruiting and training volunteers, and having contingency plans in place. So making sure people are trained, know what to do, but also, again, if we're talking about blizzard, making sure people can actually get to the location you need them to get to. All right, so authorities and responsibilities. It's not that picture in, people didn't know about this. This was actually his cert graduation, so
Oh, thanks.
yeah.
I don't realize how old you are if someone does that.
Come on.
It doesn't matter.
For York County, just one good thing to know is that the decision to open a shelter is a local one. And that's how it is throughout the entire state of Maine. The county cannot force you to open one. Red Cross can't force you to open one. It's a local decision. It's a local responsibility, and that's something that Phil and all of you take seriously. One of the things too, because you have that authority, you have that responsibility, is making sure that you take all the steps ahead of time to have that plan in place, and get people trained and know kind of what you would do in that situation. So some of the shelter plan recommendations, determine whether the plan exists or if not, create one. Think about the different type of policies, procedures you may want in place, or communication methods that people may need to know whether you're even thinking of opening up a shelter. Thinking about what role you may want the select board involved in or not involved in. How people are going to let their neighbors know, how people can stay informed with developments. A lot of these things will go into that shelter planning piece. And for the summer, usually kind of like the blue sky days, that's the best time to really plan and prepare for when that could eventually happen. Shelter roles. So again, you kind of got a whole you've got a crash course in that just now with the group activity. We just want to go over all of them, just to make sure everyone's pretty clear what the different roles you may be asked to perform. So again, the shelter manager and shift supervisor. So these are kind of the staff member, the staff management that's going to be facing a lot with town officials or acting in probably an emergency situation that won't necessarily be filled. If there's something that's big enough to have a shelter open here in Acton, likely they'll be doing a lot of other coordination work. So this will be the person that has to basically interface with the town EMA, but also responsible for all the different operational pieces at the shelter itself, making sure people are scheduled, that they're coming in, and also keeping track of all the different items that would be necessary to run the shelter for both an operational and logistical perspective. Then you have dormitory supervisor. They're the ones who can set up the dormitory areas, accommodate the access needs in the dormitory. For registration, this is a very important one. Welcoming guests and also collecting information. It's not just necessarily your name and address. A lot of the information there will tell you medical needs. It will tell you any dietary restrictions. Anything that you really need to know about that person will happen at registration. So both making sure you have the ability to collect that information, but also store it somewhere so it's easy for you to access that later on should anything arise. Feeding, these are the people who supervise preparation and distribution of food, 3 meals a day. For logistics and facilities, so work to address any facility needs or necessary supplies. I know it's very broad, but there's a lot of responsibilities there within the logistics, a lot of coordination that will need to happen with them and shift supervisors or shelter managers. Then you also have mental disaster health services we talked about earlier, and the immediate mental health needs that could arise, especially after any large disaster. Mental health needs, sometimes those are more serious than you would expect, and so it's something that you want to try to prepare for, try to have those contacts that can help for any of those. And then other just roles to note, so local emergency management and the local EOC. So Phil in this case, communicating with the shelter manager, addressing any problems that come up. If there's any resource shortages, making sure that he reaches out to us at the county EMA or to others to try to address those shortages. And then you also have the local town government. Municipal officials can assist in shelters. Again, there's just like we're here today, so there is a role there as well for the local town government. And also they can be a point of contact for any facilities related issues or any other things that arise for the shelter management and the residents. Any questions about any of this so far?
What about medical needs?
Medical, so that could go probably more under the mental disaster health services, depending on the person, depending on the needs in their case.
Part of that could, since we have CERT folks in here and at least 3-4 medical people that I get to see from here, and then the people that are certified, at least on basic medical stuff and CERT, and if someone obviously comes in the evacuation center with an injury or something, right, we'd be able to deal with some of that stuff at least before the fire department or whoever got there.
I gotta take my stuff to leave class.
With HEPA laws and everything, if Ray is sitting there taking your registrations, and he asked me, do you have any medical issues I should know about? And they say no, but they're on insulin, they're on blood pressure pills, they're on things like that. He just has a person in front of him who's probably going to be okay for 24 hours. And then they're not. Is there a way that, you know how we fill out a voter registration card? That we could, on a community basis, ask people to fill out emergency cards and an emergency contact, something.
That's kind of what I was attempting with the emergency access registry that I made.
Yeah.
To get, because obviously it's a voluntary thing. I was hoping people would utilize that, of course it would be confidential, but at least,
Exactly.
right, because they're probably not going to want to say certain things, they're standing in the line already stressed out. And I didn't get, didn't get much response to do that, unfortunately, we keep pushing it. But if you can't, did you have an idea?
I have just 2 thoughts on the matter. One, in terms of confidentiality, you have to explore HIPAA, and the people working at the shelter would also have to agree, probably in writing, to keep it confidential. And then also in writing might work better, having like a brief survey, check this box, any that apply. And then people don't have to verbally say it, and they don't feel eavesdropped upon. But there would have to be some sort of official agreement in terms of like HIPAA violations and medical law.
That's exactly what I was trying, I don't know if you've seen the form online.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish. We'll figure out a way to get people, maybe they're just not aware of it yet.
The other thing we have at our disposal is our education. These are our emergency response people, which would probably be
They
with us
call
anyway.
anyway.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So there's our emergency experts.
Well-
They also have a lot of medication.
Yes.
I was working on that call, a lot of these people may be seniors, and I think we can just kind of get in front of that and say, remember your medications, do a little checklist, have these things ready, there's bad weather coming, right, and then we're kind of splitting the responsibility.
I was thinking that later on, that's something we would put out to the town, once we get organized.
Right.
Yeah.
This would go out to all the town people anyway, letting them know that we have this available, and this is what you need to, put this on your fridge. In case of emergency.
To get into something I'm going to bring up later about asking you folks to task something, which is related to a standard operating procedure. I can write it, but I would rather have you folks, if you volunteer, all of you or a group of you or whatever, come up with that and address all those issues directly with what we need enacted after what we're looking at here. And we know the ordinance and the EOP part that relates to this, which I'll hand out to you folks. And a little bit of research, I have no doubt we can make that real good ourselves and put it right up on the website. If you haven't been, EMA does have a tab as under departments. There's a lot of info on there to look at, preparedness and all kinds of things. And one of the main things with me personally, and I put it right on there, is self-reliance. And whether you like it or not, I'm very for that. And I even put it on the website that, yes, we will get help eventually, but you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself for the first 72 hours. And it's right on that website, right up top stating that, because that's the reality. And, but it's a matter of educating people, and that's what I try to do with some of the stuff on the website. And it's not rocket science, but a lot of people just don't even think about it until it's too late. And that's part of what we're doing here, right, is we go out and talk to people, and others aware that, hey, the town is doing this. When they see the EOP and then the operating procedure for sheltering, they're gonna realize this is serious. And we're gonna be doing a rave alert test that I talked to Chris about, the folks that haven't signed up. We've got it so we can do local alerts too. To educate people and make them realize this is there and it's ready to help people. And we got a lot of excellent people volunteering and ready to do it. So, and that's what's gonna happen.
Go back to the health services thing for one minute. What we've done in the past at some of these big shelters is we set up basically a nurse's office, right? So the people who check in, they're not talking about medical. They're informed that if you have any medical needs, the nurse's office is located over there. And then the nurse's office or doctor's office, whatever you want to call it, they handle all the confidentiality portion of it. So it makes it a lot easier on the registration.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. You know, I think you gotta be careful, you know, when somebody comes into the shelter, we're not taking on their health care. You know, that's their responsibility.
Right. And if they're evacuating, it's their responsibility.
Like with the
What
registration
they know
card,
they
they
need
can do
with
it
them.
privately, we can get it into
And
the
again, it's
system, we
a
can
part of
look things
education,
up,
and
you
that's part of
know,
my
search,
job, like,
you know.
that's what this is
So,
about.
yes.
Also, when we meet the nurses with someone who maybe has chronic headaches, so.
So that's-
Like something that might,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, that might be more like a flag.
No worries. So I guess, well, maybe follow up to that. So the larger shelter, that may make sense, but in a smaller shelter like here in Acton, how do you think that would translate well in that sense?
I haven't seen the Acton school, and I don't know how that's set up, but I think they have a nurse's office. And we would still do it the same way. And the nurse's office would just set up right there.
But that's a big presumption that we would have
It is.
access to that.
We would have to.
Well, we know exactly what we have access because we have, I provided the survey that the Red Cross and I updated, Andy knows of course, and it stipulates where you can't go,
Okay.
and what is available, how many showers, everything. It's in writing and it's very specific, and Chris actually has it that he used to generate something for an exercise in the class today, so we do know
Also, you
that.
got some designated area.
Exactly.
Right.
If
It
we
doesn't
can
have to be-
create
You
a
can take a
private
room
spot,
like this
yeah,
and
yeah.
pull it around the corner.
Right, sit in the nurse's office, because that's set up already.
And we just hang a little sign that's, right, yeah.
All right, that'll work. So I think, yeah, with shelter rolls, we're a good spot here. I think the other piece is just kind of the staffing example. So this is for a much larger shelter. I don't think we're ever, hopefully not the point where we're talking about 1 to 500 people, but this is kind of an example of how a manager can oversee certain supervisors oversee others. I have some other, or chart examples that you could use for any type of shelter example here in Acton, but it's just kind of an example of what you could, how you can set things up depending on the staff you have available. There's also just a list of recommended training. I'll send it out and actually have the links so you can click on it versus having to search through that. But certain trainings that'll at least help you with some of the basic operational pieces and even just help you kind of talk the talk a little bit when it comes to working with first responders and maybe some of the concepts they'll know, especially let's say if EMS is on site, they'll understand a lot of these concepts covered in these trainings. All right, so one big thing about a shelter is the idea of like supervision, oversight, and accountability. So really like when it comes to accountability, don't necessarily want you to think of the sense of like you do what you say you're going to do, but more of understanding that like you're accountable for the people that are there to an extent. So for example, for accountability, you need to know who isn't there, have procedures for that. You need to have, if for example, you have pet sheltering in a separate room, you take charge of someone's pet, bring them there, you're responsible to make sure that, and you're accountable for that pet being there when the person goes to get the pet. Another piece is like, let's say, storing someone's medicine. I know like, we had a little bit of conversation about whether you're in charge of someone's up there or not, but let's say we have a storage place for refrigerated medicine that needs to be there. You take that, you're responsible for being accountable for noting that down, making sure people know where it is, having some type of label if need be. And that's really an important piece of emergency sheltering, is being accountable to the people that are there and thinking about their safety, their well-being, throughout the time they're a resident of the shelter. So one of the ways that you really first start establishing accountability is registration. I know like you don't want to put every single thing on registration, but it's a really important part of the sheltering process, making sure you've established who the residents are, what their needs are. So again, key roles, welcoming. So first off, outside of all these other kind of pressures, like registration needs to be welcoming, empathetic, understand why people are showing up, and the situation that they have just gone through an hour, 2 hours before. You also are having data gathering, so any type of data that we've talked about here, like making sure that you get that. There's specialized forms that we'll have for you that you can track this information. We'll work with Active EMA to make sure that all of that is set. Yes.
In terms of like overlapping your last slide and this slide, and I don't know if this is where you're going. If I were a registration and I were welcoming and taking information as applicable on whatever forms or verbally, and someone hands me medication and hands me a pet, is there some sort of like way that I'm managing this with the team that's also supervising the shelter? Because that could end up taking up time and people get kind of agitated when they want to settle in, or those sorts of things can build up and everything tends to happen at one time.
So I think in general, it's more making sure you document what is going on and also working with your team to try to at least see if that setup is there. I think one of the big things with registration at least is that potentially you may not be able to let them into the full shelter at the very beginning. Like maybe there is a big rush. At least make sure people are sheltered from any elements that could be outside. So maybe like there's like a hallway area that people can enter, having that there, but like making sure that if they go into the shelter that they're going in the way you kind of want them to in the sense of being registered. If you allow pets within the shelter area, or if you need them separate, making sure that the pet doesn't go there outside the service animal piece as well. And then working with the people that are there to make sure that that's tracked and documented, that you have a system in place so that things don't fall through the cracks.
Do you have any real experience to add to that question?
So we've done exactly that. We set up basically a waiting area, and then they go up one person at a time to the, depending on how many desks you have set up. But one person, do the check-in, then they can go into the dormitory, or if it's a family, go through the whole family, they can go into the dormitory. But they wait because you want to give the people privacy at the registration desk. So, and then,
You'll know this very well. There's a reality that comes into the picture as well. And sometimes when you're operating a shelter, you have 2 or 3 people to do all of those functions. You have to be prepared for that. If you don't have enough staffing to properly run a facility, we had to happen in San Francisco. We had only 2 people attending the whole facility, so it can be a reality and a real problem.
And then if I could touch real quick, look, like the warming and cooling centers would be pretty straightforward and easy to manage. The shelter side is we're looking at, okay, the Red Cross may take 2 or 3 days to get here. And this is what I'll be handing out from the EOP. So our job would be to prepare that shelter because people are going to be coming before that, right? And do what we can prior to prepare for the Red Cross's arrival, but we do have 24s. We only have 24, but at least we do now have 24 cots and blankets and such. The school has a kitchen. We would do whatever we had to in preparation before the Red Cross got there. So, that's where the sheltering side of what we would be doing. And of course, we'd stick around and help the Red Cross with staffing as much as we could too.
Would the Red Cross really come here? Wouldn't they go to a bigger metropolitan area? I mean, if it was that much of a disaster?
we go wherever the shelters are set up and wherever we're asked to.
No, I have a phone number I call and say, we have a shelter agreement. This is Phil Cruz on that. And we've had a dam partially break or there's a forest fire. And I'm going to open the school as a shelter in preparation for something bad to happen before it does. And just I wanted to let you know I might need you up here real soon. And that's going to be a local problem, right? And most of the problems are local. It's not a hurricane wiping out the state of Maine. It's something that bad happens locally. Like we're surrounded by woods, right?
We did one in St. Joseph's College, I think that was 2 Christmases ago or something. We had 3 people in the shelter. But we were there right away, and we maintained that shelter. We actually fed them Christmas dinner. You know, but it doesn't matter how big or small. Red Cross will be fine.
Yeah, because in the past, Sanford has opened, correct? At the Memorial Gym, is that what they
Yes.
opened? So we've had people inquire before, and we have just informed them in the past that we don't have a shelter open, but this is the closest one nearby.
And that's exactly what we're doing away with, is keeping it local.
I can understand if it was an isolated area, but if it was a large swath, it was a large area, say a bunch of tornadoes came through. They came through from the ocean all the way over to New Hampshire somewhere, who knows, you know, I mean, like down south how it's been happening, right? I mean, it's been crazy. Something like that could happen, I mean, it could happen.
Sure.
And I'm just, that's what I was curious.
We could also be acting as an overflow facility. Say you had a coastal flood. Well, like we did, I'm way up in Lima, not far away from New Orleans, when they asked us to set up a shelter there because they were transporting people that far away to house them. So we could be acting as an overflow facility for another area.
Right, I'm guessing a town, let's say Newark or Scarborough, or
Yeah.
our county, would make a request to the county EMA, I'm guessing, and maybe they would contact myself or whoever here and ask, is that a possibility? So, yeah. And of course, if the select board said yes, I certainly would.
In a very, very large disaster, I think some of you have seen or participated in very large disasters, there will be regional shelters that are set up. But in what you just described a minute ago, if there's a widespread disaster, you're going to need churches, you're going to need schools, you're going to need in the local level. And some residents can't or won't travel that far to go to a regional shelter. So we're going to need all of that capability and all of these volunteers. That's why this training.
No, I understand, that's what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is, Red Cross isn't gonna come up, they're not gonna respond to that. You know, especially immediately, maybe after a couple of weeks or something, maybe, you know.
Well, the first thing I would do in the interim,
And set up shelters.
Yeah, Red Cross works different than FEMA.
Okay.
first thing I do in the interim is ask for help from the county, which immediately. And, you know, we need 40 cots or whatever, I'll fly down there and grab them. If we need a bunch of water, whatever, you know. That would be the first resource if there, you know. But again, that's being resource self-reliant.
Right, that's what I'm saying, I understand that, yeah.
I mean, we have to do what we have to do, and I'm sure it's different every time, right?
Well, then we also end up with all the able-bodied people that we have trained that are working in the shelters. Your comment calls, we need more bodies down here. You know, Sanford had a big fund. We need more help. They got help.
And we have the CERT folks as well that would be called up.
Yeah, we got all these specialist people, and they got all these, you know, Acton's got a couple of EMTs who can send, or a couple of people who do hauling, driving buses.
It's like looking for the helper, but also being the helper.
We're-
Not
we're
waiting
little
for the
guy.
bigger helper if you can help it.
So it's all about preparation, right? There's 4 phases of this, emergency management. To me, preparation has a good way of taking care of the other 3. Right? It has a big effect on mitigation needed. It certainly can reduce the recovery time if you prepare well, and the response time as well, and how you respond. We didn't do any of this. I mean, I'll tell you a story real quick. What made me think of this is I was here a couple of years ago at a select board meeting after those storms last April, and there was finger pointing about why a warning center wasn't open. Now, I have no idea what the hell they were talking about. You know, what is that and what is EMA? But that conversation where nobody was taking ownership and there was no formal way of doing anything and nothing got done, right? And there were a lot of folks that needed somewhere to go and it didn't happen. And that stuck with me big time, that conversation, that little tiny event in our town. And so that's not going to happen again.
We still have that chance of that event in the winter.
Right.
And when all these trees came down last year and stuff like this, there's people without power for days on end,
Oh, yeah.
with no place to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I can
We
see
lost it twice last year for 5 days at a time within a month and a half.
Yeah.
That's
5 days, no power at all.
So,
That's not uncommon up here.
so Phil, getting back to being prepared, is there a budget, whether it's coming from the county, the state, or the town, where we can have some of these things already, positioned, we have a place to store things? Or is that what you're hoping to do with your EOP? I mean, I don't want to muddy the waters here, but, I mean, we're talking about, feeding people and having snacks for even just a cooling center so that we're not running out to get supplies when we'd rather be here, unpacking what we already have.
As far as the financial part, that's what the ordinance took care of, right? If you look at it. Which is obviously critical. You don't want to be penny pinching and me wondering how I'm going to get $500 to go buy a bunch of stuff. The ordinance took care of that. So the first $5,000, I don't even have to explain. If it's more than that, all I have to do is tell the select board why. So that part's not an issue in my mind. That's why we did the ordinance first. Because that's not something we discussed at the time something's wrong. That problem's gone.
That's great.
And again, that flexibility and experience, no matter how rigid your ordinance or whatever is what matters in the real world. And that's how I do things. So we get a lot of talented folks. That's what's going to happen. I have no doubt. Whatever has to happen.
I'm sure. Oh, no worries. And I'm sure like anybody who's volunteered, done a lot of this work before, there's always something new that comes up each time. I assume it's never the same, all this different stuff. And so that's why it's important to have some of the foundational concepts, but also just being able to work with each other and kind of like brainstorm with each other and understand, okay, here's the solution, how do we solve it? And you're not always going to have all the resources or the prior experience to know exactly how to do that, but at least be able to come up with a satisfactory solution that helps you, helps the resident, etc. So just with registration, I think we talked about a lot of kind of the challenges of it, the importance, making sure that you have accurate information about people. Other piece, just again, thinking about accountability, accountability for safety, making sure there's procedures in place for any type of hazard that could occur at the shelter as well. We do care about resident safety, but also your safety is paramount as well, making sure you're aware of that. That's including any staff briefings, etc. Making sure you have different proof of identification, fire extinguishers. You can assign a safety officer if you have enough people to do so. That's something that can definitely be helpful, especially if you have a larger shelter population.
Quick question.
Yes.
Well, I thought security coming in, so let's take a look at that.
Okay, yes. So security, so again, these are more just different procedures to have in place. Again, the shelters, usually there's recorded cases, but there are sometimes things that can happen there. So making sure you have policies for understanding how you deal with things such as fights, any type of theft, making sure you have policies for location. Again, if you're talking about a large school gym, there's a lot of different access points, making sure you're working with facilities and making sure you know, okay, what's open, what's not, and what potentially has to be accessible in terms of maybe like egress for fire or different items like that. And then just, remember with a lot of these different security issues, residents come from potentially dangerous situations, potentially, traumatic issues. So like making sure that either you're trained on de-escalation or you know somebody who is to be able to help in any of those situations.
And Chris, sorry, what I asked earlier, what we're going to do, the EOP's out, but before the end of June, that will be completed, blessed by the select board and in public. But what I'm going to ask the county, if it's okay, is to create real exercises back up here in Acton from that EOP that we have in place. Let's say it's an exercise where we have to evacuate to the school and actually do this, right? We're going to do that. So, make this real. So it's kind of, we do this in the military. You train. So you're not thinking about things, you just do it, right? That's why we're here. It's not that hard, and it's fun, actually, sometimes.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it addresses the question, what do you do with people that are bringing in weapons, fire
I mean, in general, one of the things we try to stress is that you have rules up front. A lot of times you can have a little printout that says these are the shelter rules, and that can have anything from quiet hours to what's allowed inside. Guns is one of those. Again, if you decide that that's something you don't want in your shelter, which I think a lot of towns do, then that's something to make sure that people leave that in their vehicle. If there's any issue with that, or somebody gets confrontational over that, that's one of those where then you involve public safety at that point. It's not your job to enforce it to the point that it puts yourself in danger.
And this is where our standard operating procedure will address all that kind of stuff, right? It should, it will.
I was just, under reading it, securing any weapons that the client may have, and I didn't know if that discussion had been had with school. I'm sure the school has lockers, and I don't know if they would be, if the person says, well, I gotta have my family in here, you notice that they got a piece on them, and you're like, hey, you can't really bring that in here. Would a locker be available to be locked those weapons in? That was for our meeting.
Not those lockers. But it's something like that, to make it like, couldn't we provide some signage? Just some really basic signage of, the rules,
And again, that's exactly why that SOP is going to be up on the website
Good.
in everybody's face. And Dan will be nice enough to put it right on that front homepage and do it. Maybe, I don't know how much we pay him.
That would be good, because even though the school may have their rules at this point in time, we're using it for an emergency shelter, so there's going to be different stipulations. So, yeah, the SOP could line that out to where then you have state laws, then people's constitutional rights. All this stuff is still going to be there.
Well, they can have those elsewhere.
Yeah, but that would have to be in our SOP and not all.
Right, but that's mass gathering for an emergency situation. You don't want to have a bunch of people that are scared to death because they don't know what's going on, carrying weapons, knives, guns, whatever.
You know, in a children's locker and then forget about them 3 days later. Kids
Right.
are back to school.
It's not allowed in the doors.
No, and the situation I'm coming, so let's say for example, there is a disaster where we have to utilize those buses to go pick people up. So, in bringing them over to the shelter, like I said, you notice it, or somebody disposes it. So there's really nowhere to store that. They can't store it in their vehicle because they went to go get picked up. Okay?
Leave them home.
Well, see, before they get on the bus, they would be told you cannot bring it.
Right.
Yeah.
This is where the SOP is. That's exactly what that's doing. It's saying, before they even get on the bus, they're being told, before you step on that bus, this is what you cannot bring and do. If they don't like it, then they get off the bus.
It all boils down to it's our operation, it's our rules.
Yes.
Right, but you're not gonna risk a bunch of good people who are already stressed out because somebody is selfish and decides they want to show what a hero they are. I couldn't care less what their issue is, but you're not gonna endanger the good people you're trying to help to satisfy one person's issue. Right, and that's why you make common sense rules that everybody can agree on and make sense to keep people safe.
But long before they get on the bus, so they already know, these are the
Yes.
things you can bring, these are the things you should bring, these are the things, just leave them at home.
Bring your
So
meds,
that
bring
people,
some clothes.
exactly, so no one's surprised when they can't, come with their arsenal on the bus.
And
It
again,
shouldn't be
this
surprised.
can be addressed in that operating procedure that we write. We can put whatever we want in there. Without extra words, we can be very specific and put it on a public website so there's no excuse. People, the word of mouth will get around, people start looking at it. And that way when you tell them you can't bring that, I don't think it'll reduce that problem a lot, I think, in advance. So that's how important that operating procedure is.
At least having the SOP, you have something you can point to and say, these are the rules, period.
Yeah,
And be done.
They can choose not to get on the bus.
literally
If you want
and
to walk
figuratively.
around with a gun, that's up to you, but
Might be one a little bit.
Short bus.
It's different.
Yeah, that's why it's good to talk about all these policies at a time and things like that. And the nice thing is that you're going to be in the process of writing that, so you have the ability to kind of make, an impact in that and really kind of decide what works best for your town, communicate that, talk about it, select board meetings, et cetera. So. Yeah, good. Okay, so so we have operating logistics section. I want to kind of go through just to make sure you have enough time for your exercise. So again, operation and logistics. In the terms of this presentation, operating is really thinking of, okay, how do we run the shelter on a daily basis? So thinking about to run any type of shelter, any type of organization, a lot of it is really people management and having a schedule and just making sure that day to day that there's a process going to make sure that there's things like meals that are happening, any activities that need to happen. Really, those are all a lot of the operational pieces. Logistics, we'll get into a little bit later. How do you get the stuff that you need at the shelter? How do you manage those resources? And for our definition, it's how you manage the space. There's definitely a lot of overlap between operations and logistics. Definitely the people who are those leads or supervisors, however you want to title it, they're going to need to work together hand in hand, especially with the shelter manager as well. But just wanted to give a little bit of background on that. So thinking about like daily workflow. So again, with the shelter, it's not just necessarily everybody sitting, waiting around and things like that. You want to try to have some type of schedule. People can kind of get into a little bit of a routine. It's still not going to be the exact same routine that they left, but at least having different activities that occur throughout the day, especially between the different meal times. So you can kind of structure it that way and make sure you have a process for, okay, lights on at X time, lights off at a different time, at least having some things to do throughout the day. So a shift briefing, so whenever people show up for their shift, you can schedule the shifts however you want, 8 hours, 12 hours, whatever works best for you. You want to make sure that people understand exactly what's going on. Think about any type of briefing you've done, in the business world, and any type of background you've had. You've had these type of briefings where you just need to understand what's the pertinent information, and as well, if you're the person that's maybe handing your role off to somebody else, like operations to operations, logistics to logistics, making sure that person understands the key pertinent information. If you're logistics and you're handing it off to someone, you're expecting a truckload of food to show up at 8 a.m., making sure the person knows that and different things. So you'll have this overall shift briefing that will be for everybody, but make sure you're having a small, even just if it's a quick 1-minute chat with the person you're transitioning your role to. So for staff management, again, for anybody who's coming on for the first time, providing some type of orientation. Again, this does not have to be an hour-long piece, but making sure everybody understands where the key pieces of the shelter are, any key incidents they need to know about, so that way anybody who's coming on volunteering, they understand exactly where they need to be, where things are. If you can take the time to walk through, that is definitely helpful. You may not have that time. The nice thing is that here in Acton, you know what your shelter is, so in theory, as part of any type of preparation, you could try to do a tour or just try to at least do a walkthrough and say, okay, like I know this facility beforehand. So making sure people are aware of their surroundings when they're working. Information area. So again, you've got to have this here at the town hall. You've seen a lot of places, bulletin boards, places that you can put up key information. Stuff like the daily schedule is very helpful. Any type of meeting times, safety information. You can also put information about the disaster itself. I mean, like you may not necessarily want it blaring on TV or anything like that. People may have just gone through that. But people understanding, okay, here's the status of maybe this closed road, or maybe this section of town is going to have its evacuation order lifted at a certain time. Making sure that there's that pertinent information there that people have, as well as any type of resources that people can access. I'd say at least immediately after disaster, a lot of federal resources aren't there yet, but there could be definitely some local ones, any type of groups, maybe like Howells or something. There could be resources that are there, just trying to gather that so people know they're supported.
Chris, on that, REOP does designate a public information officer, so that anything going out to the public's coming from one person, period, to avoid problems with people getting in the way of the fire department doing things, or rumors. So that's part of it as well.
Excellent.
So the workers will be trained to, if the press comes to you asking you questions, please go see the information on public information.
Yep. That avoids a lot of problems.
And then other piece, there will be some daily reporting there. It does not have to be, a full 10 10-page briefing, but there will be, certain reports usually done by shelter leadership, just so people understand what's going on. Maybe that's resource requests to county EMA, but there is that kind of reporting in the background, so just good to know that if there's anything that needs to go into that report, telling the person who's writing it, hey, please put this in there, etc. Okay, so feeding. So thinking about, at least with the cooling and warming centers, anything that's set up here or in the church next door, it's usually going to be light snacks, beverages, things that make people comfortable for maybe a couple hours that they're here. For disaster shelters, 3 square meals a day, beverages, refreshments. When it comes to food, sometimes if residents can, and if they have a very strict diet, they're encouraged to bring some of their own pieces. That's not always something that can happen, but to the extent where someone has that ability, that is something that can be helpful. The thing with feeding is that it can fall under operations or logistics, and this presentation is operations, but it's one of those where the operational part is making sure that everything's set up to have the meals, and logistics is making sure you get the food there in the first place. So some of the considerations, I know this is very, very simplification, but tried to take it into like broad, a broad high level. So really, when your shelter manager needs to determine 3 main things. Are you going to get the food? So that's working with logistics. How you will ensure food safety. That one is probably the broadest definition here because we could probably have an entire presentation on food safety. Hope you probably have, what, like 20 hours of experience? Yeah, it's a 20-hour course on food safety. So don't have too much time to go into that. Part of the EOP process is really determining what kind of standard you're going to set there, and some of that could be escalating in terms of disaster. There's varying guidance as to whether you take donated food. And there's a difference between donated food from, let's say, a registered pizza place versus somebody's house. And so really, kind of determining what makes sense. I mean, I would say if it's a true disaster and emergency, getting people fed is just the best way to go about it, however you can do that. It's just trying to think of like what processes you have in place and, what your tolerance is and, what your community will accept. Some larger communities, they may not accept food from home. You may say, okay, well, actually, these groups could because they have maybe they always host like a potluck in the town hall every year, and that's something you already do. Like it could be a local decision based off of what works best for Acton.
There's a kitchen in the school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, kitchen is fine.
Our EOP does task pretty much every department in town, and we do have a health officer here, which is part of that committee that help her write the ordinance, but in this case, each one of those department heads is going to be responsible when that EOP gets to them in a few weeks to determine with the select board and all their job descriptions that they're okay to do, what their tasks are going to, responsibilities of being an emergency. So that's a good one that would come under, let's say, the health officer that the town does have, be involved in what the food safety standards are of making some of those decisions. So that is one of the department heads that is in EOP with tasks, and I'm going to remember that particular one when we get to it. But yeah, that's good.
And the other piece is varying needs, dietary restrictions. This one, if you have questions, talk to me later. I can help you with that. Just I know I've been done different trainings where that takes a 30-minute sidetrack and everything, but that's another piece to consider is just those varying needs and how you can address that. And again, that's something that can be addressed in your town's plan. Okay, logistics. So again, logistics, procurement, buying things, really, what resources do we need? How do we get them? So that's what logistics is in charge of. So major logistical responsibilities. So these are, a list of different things that you would need for a shelter. A lot of them make a lot of sense. A lot of things related to facilities, to food. Sometimes you also have to manage things like donations, and so how you're going to have a process for that. So a lot of different roles that logistics will have to fulfill. The other thing, logistics, is we put the design and layout of the shelter into logistics as well. So again, thinking about, you have a school, what your shelter is, thinking about the layout and how that layout and your access to certain parts of the building will determine how you set up the entire shelter. So different areas to include, a lot of them relate to the roles we talked about earlier, so like registration, dormitory, and feeding, food prep areas. We have different areas like for pet sheltering as well, have the medical, One thing as well is just thinking about like some break areas for staff. Even if you are on an 8-hour shift, nobody can go 8 full hours without maybe just even a 5-minute break. So if there's any way to have an area for staff to go,
Not if you work in healthcare.
even though it's restroom, right?
I mean, I have 2 small kids, I haven't used the bathroom alone today.
Fair. So, but like having at least some areas for staff break. Office space, maybe that's where you actually store some of the forms as well. So these are different kind of areas to include in your shelter. So again, the dormitory area. So thinking about setting up the sleeping area, assigning those areas, assigning any type of hygiene kits, blankets, etc. that you have there. I think the one big thing to remember for any type of spacing consideration, so for one person, they usually get 40 to 60 square feet. I can't visualize what that is without having something in place to see what that is. That's the size of a king bed, so generally that's the space you try to give. For people with maybe functional access needs, mobility devices, or the service animals, that's about 100 square feet of space, so that's 2 king beds together. Other thing is thinking about the floor spacing as well, and like where you're going to put people within the shelter itself. So thinking about there's maybe a certain area for single adults, then some small children can go in a different section. Powered medical devices, I put that there mainly because they need to be closer to outlets if there's a certain area of the gym or school that has that ability. And then also space for people with pets, depending on whether you allow the pets to cohabitate on the gym floor or whether they need to be in a separate classroom or room area. So again, there's also pet sheltering. So again, you can have pet shelters that actually stand alone. So it'd be like if people were out here, the pets are over at the church, but you can also co-locate them when they're in a separate area or cohabitate, which is on the gym floor, like I mentioned. Again, we have health and mental health services, whole array of different things here. Yes.
I don't want to put us back too far, but are pets allowed at the shelter? I was like reading on that line in terms of like service animals versus pets. I just didn't know.
Our shelter, when I was working with the Mass Care Red Cross, and this is where Andy was a great help again. He said, they've asked, put in the questions, is there a separate area for pets? And of course, they have a space requirement, and so you can stack kennels for cats and stuff like that. And of course, Andy was good enough to come up with a separate building that is heated. It's a large garage. He gave me the floor plan and everything. That is right, that detail is on the survey that Red Cross has. And obviously, all of this stuff is, Andy's going to be a great help if, God forbid, we have to do this over there. Obviously, the facility issues and questions that myself and all of us might have. So it's good that he's here and we appreciate it. Thank you.
That's a good question. But I will say with pets, though, definitely ADA, any service animals, so we have an animal designed to do a specific task for a disability, that's something that's always allowed per ADA. For the emotional support animals, that's under FHA or fair housing. Emergency shelters don't fall under that, so you can decide what you want to do with more of the emotional therapy animals, but service animals have to be allowed to stay unless they're excessively unruly.
I was going to say, don't forget to mention what you can and cannot ask if someone says they have a service animal.
Correct.
Right.
Because that one, I have to remember sometimes too, so if you have it written down. But yeah, so you can ask 2 questions. One, is the animal a service animal required because of a disability? And then 2, what work or task has the animal been trained to perform? But you cannot ask the animal to perform that task. So
Or
even
ask
if
the
the animal can
disability.
open a fridge or close a fridge, you can't ask to see that. But in
So
general,
people could lie and bring
And you
their
can't
pets.
have to prove that it is a service.
Right.
correct. So just those 2 questions, and if they answer correctly to those,
Just really
then
the only issue.
for the ADA, you need to allow the service animal be with them. However, again, if the animal's not house trained, if they're really causing a scene, then that's something you're allowed to ask in that case.
And they have to be able to have someone or themselves take care of the pet. Shelter folk are not
Yeah.
required to take care of any of their pets, or any of the ADA.
So again, health and mental health services, don't want to steal this too much, but overall, again, make referrals as necessary, make sure it's with people who are credentialed and trained in this. Yes, I'll let you read that after, but yeah, so it's the same thing I kind of said there. And then last thing, just think about with any type of mobilization of a shelter, the back end of that is demobilization. I think usually we say like try to plan for that as early on as possible. But really the biggest thing is for people, for residents who are in a shelter and may not have a home to go to when it closes, making sure you work with them to transition that as best as humanly possible. This is kind of a general plan of the demobilization, and to review that, but overall, again, you don't just make a decision to close and then hour later you close, making sure you have a process to do that and communicate that well to residents. All right, so group activity. I'm going to pass out some items here, and I should need some pens. What? It is actually.
Looks like a lot of work, looks like by the time you get to.
Okay, so the first two.
Break it down.
All right, first two tables for table one.
I'm out of here.
Okay, back here,
Are you driving home?
for team two.
Thank you.
Back.
Drive safe.
Those. Pens. Here.
You have off.
Please do, sorry.
Okay, so.
Really split so many papers at a time.
All right, so real quick, your scenarios that are in front of you, both of you have the same first scenario. So this is a outline here of the Acton Elementary School. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so this is an actual plan of the Acton Elementary School. These kind of stop signs, again, sorry. Anything to the left of this you can't use, anything to the right of this you can't use. So we're going to ask you to put the different parts of the shelter layout on top of Acton Elementary. That should be about 10 minutes or so. And then both of you actually have different scenarios for two. So try to talk that through with your team members, how you would address that, and then we'll do a report out at the end. So you have 20 minutes for both, 10
Yeah,
for
I'm just thinking, you got it.
Extract.
Yeah, no problem.
So, assuming that's the main entrance?
Just the.
Do you want to just like write the name?
So voter registration.
Down to bottom, and you want to-
Yeah.
Take a left.
Is that off?
Registration is right.
There's some like a waiting area. Is there like a doorway on your like perfect?
They are. See you at a furnished
So, there's a crowd coming in.
No, that's 9:45. I'll show up.
Oh, this is
What time do you want me
Here's
to-
stop.
So we can't use anything to show you.
Between the district offices and Mike.
So, there's plenty of space in the living room.
This is not.
Including benches on that.
Yeah, correct.
I've not been in the school
Yes, you
once or twice.
Oh, yeah,
I think
yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So it's definitely here.
It's a big hallway when you walk
This
in.
is all the
I was-
backside.
Yeah, we'll have an extra here too.
Yeah.
So
Probably
And
the
then
registration
you
that
go
right
out
in
that
the
way. They don't,
They were boy on this.
then you have to go.
Yeah, that's a good size.
Yeah, that's
So
a very.
here's the driveway, here's the circle, here's the door in.
And hopefully it's nice.
This leads out to the back fields. So
I don't know if they have to hang out outside for
Right,
it.
this is where we're going in, and the office is right here on the
Yeah.
left-hand side. So this whole area right here is open for registration. It's a nice big room.
So are we allowed to use the
Feeding
office?
is down, there's
Does
a
it
picture.
have a calendar where you can talk to
It has a contract, I don't know if we're, I presume we're allowed to use it because it's inside the
Purpose
stop.
there.
It's that way area, I would say use the music room,
Yeah.
because that's like right off the campus.
Yeah, they can congregate here and maybe register in the office.
Privacy when somebody.
That's what the office is. They have access to it.
We have access to
Yeah, so they'll come down the
And there's just
hallway.
only kind of on the best of that could be.
They'll just come into the hallway and then go down the ramp
There's
into
also
the
a
gym.
bathroom in the
That's the
kitchen.
ramp in.
So register.
Register yourself.
It is, I think in the kitchen.
Congregate in the hallway, register in the
Yeah.
office.
So we get that.
Storage might be, storage might be okay in the library or.
Dormitories.
And then here's
The gym is the drama.
So you've got a kitchen here.
Yes,
And,
yeah.
The bathroom is over here. Yeah, so there's
So-
bathrooms here and
Into the
there's
gym.
bathrooms. Those are the office rooms. So if they got a shower, yeah.
This is the drawing for the Spencer Gold?
I'm gonna assume this, and so off the back side. We use the library for our, like our state after that garage. And
The library or the, probably the library.
And then back to medical, go to the nurse's office. That's where you're saying, right?
Yes, that's where the nurse.
We could probably have it right in here.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Because that's good size. And that
Uh,
would be like
it's
our
more
break room
office.
too, I mean, that would be like.
An office stuff.
So we can also use office space for the
We have, we've got food practice.
Recreation to be in the room.
We've got staff break in there.
The recreation to be in the art room, staff break, I mean, we have a library.
Yeah, we have this library.
But also we need good storage,
Yeah.
because this big, right, if we have more people.
Staff, yeah.
This is
The
the
library.
library
Everybody
staff break.
needs to report this stuff?
Yeah, I'm writing it.
And so everybody has a.
I think that the library would be area, you know, I don't think that necessarily.
Or just bring it also be in
The
the.
documents would be.
And then we're using kind of entryway as a way.
Or the staff break room.
Or just.
Yeah,
Staff break.
But you may need that. That's what I would think, is a smaller area. you would need.
Is this a classroom storage?
Yeah, it's all.
No, this is. Can we use it?
Can we use it? Principal's
I have to
office.
remove them because it's off the kitchen.
Well, this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, the nurses all.
And recreation is one of
They are room recreation. Our teaching guys go
Because they can go up,
That's what
no.
I'm thinking, Jeff.
Boy, I don't know.
Then go outbound.
Yeah.
Then.
But that would be coming around. That could, if it was nice outside,
Yeah.
right, recreation
Thinking about kids
outside.
with the playground, right, have the playground.
Yeah, so that makes sense to have the graphic off in the art room, because then if they can't go outside, you go right outside.
Sit there and sit up.
Yeah, but I wonder if, can we ask if it's okay? Because you're telling us what this is.
My husband went to
I mean,
school.
I
I don't
don't
think
think
no
so.
one else, she used to work for me.
Break room and then
When I was
in the
a
library.
teacher.
So you could
No,
use-
not the break office.
The office and.
Storm, I know.
Storage serves as.
Right, that's right.
But the other thing.
The music room could also be used right off the cafeteria.
Yeah, so that means your registration on this
Space.
is some of them here.
But there's plenty of room in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, use it.
I'm sorry, there's.
That's how old right now.
It's so funny because I would have written it right on the map. Yeah, no, you
One person to report.
It worked, it worked.
Because that's gonna be our.
How would you feel about changing it to your
Okay.
News, and I need to register those people.
Yeah, they're
now. It's funny, because it's doctor's office for registration.
Where they are.
The nurse's office is available.
Yeah.
How we can explain it.
Right next to you.
There's a register and then.
Dressing room?
We're
Very empty ball field.
Community safety protocols, is the playground, is the playground off the map? Is there a fence outside the perimeter? I don't.
Like, 5,000.
Safety protocols fence is a nice start to a safety protocol in terms of containment. Yeah, I was gonna say, we need the SOP, I'm just gonna be like.
How would you handle spontaneous?
Probably about 5 times the
Separate
size.
register and then.
Right, but then they're the same area here.
It's also a big stage.
Except
It's also a big
people who have
stage.
been more privy
The sign.
And ask them if they are planning to stay, and if so, they can register that.
I mean,
Saves us two things that everything.
It goes back to
That's why he's there all the time. Yep, great idea.
Direct to a different room.
Well, you guys know.
We know the people that,
I was gonna say, I don't.
he's gonna walk in here, it's a disaster, I'm just gonna tell you that.
But shadowing is a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want our neighbors to help us, but,
But also it's like, if someone is like a guest and they're just, are they planning on staying? Are they planning on helping? What's the role that they're planning to play?
This also states.
It's a great idea.
Additional costs are reflected on the morning. How did you help?
Yep.
I would allocate.
Perfect.
but that's for a long.
Right?
Seniors and,
You need to ask them if they intend to stay, and if they don't, you need to kind of ask them
But that raises.
if they're guests.
So if they want
Right.
to pay somebody who's staying at the shelter, we'll get that person to invite out.
Great idea. To the
Recreational.
recreational with the county, we can check in for our registration, depending on what they're
Every single human being in that building has to check in. Because we meet in person.
So what would you do for people without
That
that?
building at.
minors in archaeology, so it's like, yeah, tell me the people, tell me where they are, tell me what they do.
Even when I was spending the night in the house.
He was,
I'll get his phone number.
he was
Logistics.
I was already out.
You're gonna have to do it all. That's very helpful.
shadowing two volunteers and
So what was
yes,
that?
to invite. We have 5 shadows to.
That we would be.
Well, we're
able to
gonna bring
call
through their business, so if the guest comes in and says, I'm here to visit Joe, we're gonna bring Joe to them and they can spend time in the recreation. And then they can go and make a decision to check in to the shelter or check out. Either way, we need to know where they
So how do you
are.
communicate the
Yeah.
decision to the
So
shelter
safety
resident?
protocols would be based on SOP, right?
5, 6 more minutes.
Okay, hold on, you got.
6 more minutes.
What if we, so, that's, your documents are involved in all of it, should be documented physically. And in my opinion, on paper, because it's, you're not gonna have the battery, yes,
Some
yes,
meetings,
perfect.
volunteers, we could have a volunteer form.
And like, it might be nice if a guest decides they want to volunteer and they've been sussed out, right? We eliminate them as someone who's risky, right? They can help with cleaning, they can help with moving some storage, they can help with rearranging stuff. First, they have the shadow. So when do they graduate from being a shadow?
Probably on day 6 of the.
After we close the shelter is what?
Correct, okay, and then, the manager should probably be in charge of the communication with
The
that
last
acting
question, how do you
event, right?
communicate
Yeah,
with the
Cut out all that
EMA?
communication and just streamline it.
So whoever the shelter manager who is in constant communication with Bill,
Perfect.
who's also in their constant communication with county inmates, as well as the police.
Okay, question, how does that work if
What
we
do we do
don't
about
have
the how do
power
we communicate with
service?
Oh, they have.
That have like walkie-talkies and such, generators and.
Yes, I have the same radio the fire chief has. and
To Bill.
I mean, if you've got that big a problem, I mean, you're not getting someone who lost people, you're just gonna have to
I love that.
get good at
Perfect.
Neil's in charge of the county's, especially.
We have communication too.
Cool.
You know,
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that later.
Yeah.
Radio is great.
I would say that also has, you're not gonna be there 24 hours. So the shift supervisor can communicate to
Right.
so taking charge.
So,
Been there, done that.
I've run access to the hospital, right? It's a weapon.
It is.
It's a tool.
It is a weapon, my husband always carries them, and I'm always like, you need to take that out of your pocket, and I do small kids, and I say, it needs to go up, it's a weapon.
I have
That's a weapon.
successfully argued how we're doing that as a tool.
schools.
So what did
Well, just out of curiosity, when you
your
get to
job,
these shelters,
for
I
your
know you
job.
But you're
Right.
probably
Not
a
for the-
reasonable adult. Not everyone should be able to make that argument.
And,
I agree,
going
I
around
think it's a reasonable
different
request.
agencies, shelters.
allow that in.
Did you go home today?
No
I
fire.
What did you say?
Firearms, no,
None of that's
Sometimes
coming
you
in.
gotta.
none of that can come in.
All you'll have is
A lot
your
of times
mind.
we say,
And that's dangerous, man, I'm telling you what.
But you know,
That's how
we're
it
not
happens.
a police officer.
Basically, if you're big, you're big, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
right.
That's how you have it.
Well, I mean, also in special.
The Hell's Angels try to come in.
Yeah. We're having Hell's Angels on this side, that, you know,
I
I
run
run
her I have Hell's Angels.
I broke-
Yes, I have that too.
Because that's where they live.
But also,
Yeah, and I have the good part.
Was that ever a problem?
Jim always
People
says,
don't
so
want
that's,
to-
they'll come and go to the conference.
Because you guys were,
Remind me before you come in.
That's why I'm like, I can't remind it, and I can't let anybody else.
Right, right. Yeah.
somebody goes in one
How do you redirect
Direct
this
them.
document their involvement? What are they?
In an underground
What,
shelter.
how do you redirect your
And
documents
it's
or
all
involvement?
there.
So
This,
what
We
we full up right now.
never had to wonder about anything.
Want to list for call.
Our children were very young at the time. That's
That's
so
about
good.
That's what that question's
Yeah.
for. That's what I did for.
I didn't know the context of the way it was written.
No,
I didn't know what the context was.
And
That's
somebody
the,
would,
that's the
they'll
whole
say,
concept of
you
getting
know,
a
yeah, town clerk.
that's
Let us tell you what's
Well,
going on now, and they give you,
It's true.
sounded like Dragnet, just the facts, just the facts. This is, you know,
See, that's no problem.
the eye of the storm and
Straightforward.
such and such,
Two
the
people
winds
were
are such and
one
such. We're doing the best we can to get
sorry,
her
one
back.
on the diagram of the shelter and the other.
About 10 minutes because you keep
I
cutting.
think that's.
We'll be supposed to write it in the light and
There's
hurry.
multiple people.
You're gonna come to our.
No, okay, he's got it right down.
I can't be 100% permission.
The EMA is totally different than the media.
Okay.
I need to go in the shower.
Well, the ship supervisor.
We got an enterprise here, so we're all set. We can open it.
Oh, absolutely.
We really.
But it feels good to be prepared. It's not a.
Oh, yeah.
I've done a couple drills and then, right.
I like the idea of the practice sessions.
It's gonna take a lot of drills. Or that's why you live in there, that's in high school.
Yeah.
Never lost that one.
That's
And then
Very important.
ask for approval. You have your after action.
Always.
Right, what went wrong, what can we do
No,
different?
because you brief after code, you brief after.
Well,
Right.
So then we have to allocate a person to report on
My
each.
writing's awful, sorry.
So who's gonna
The objective one,
She's got all the information.
we need two people.
we already have.
I will do objective one, one of you guys can do objective two.
So, since you have the most experience, I think that would be. a-
I know, but they're not really, I just, my notes, you know.
Right, that's no problem.
But I think that.
They're based on SOP.
Yeah, that was like, it's right there in your mind. It's right there in your mind. It's scripted.
No, it's you.
What's
It's
the,
common sense to me, so.
Objective two, we have
Okay, it's a group decision. No, it's a town decision.
Excited with Dan and Kelly.
Oh, but the other guy's name was Dan.
Oh,
Yes, it was Dan.
Bishop thoughts?
Yes, see? It's in there somewhere.
But he left, so.
I know, and you're Tammy, and Ally. I'm usually good with names. I'm so sorry.
All right, are you ready? Ready?
We didn't get to
Okay. You'll be second when it comes to the list. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so each team, and we designated somebody to report out. Want just you to give us a brief overview of where you place things. I also want to know about one or two places that were hard to map and why. So, team two, start us off.
So I'm going to talk about the objective one. For registration, we decided that they would come to the main entrance, and in that hallway, we would gather there, and we would register them in the office. Dormitory, it will be the gym. Feeding, would be the kitchen, and then the food prep would be in that cafeteria sort of area, kitchen, cafeteria. The staff break area, we decided would be in the library, just because it's a little bit quieter, and it's to be by there, and just kind of get their mind out of that. Office space would be in the main office behind the registration. There's a couple things there. The pet shelter, we thought the garage, just because you can go out that back door and go in there between the two. Storage of documents and supplies, we've got the music room. And then also in the kitchen, there's a little room that could be like food supplies, I think. Health and medical, nurse's office, which is also the main office. And the recreation, we're gonna go in the art room because it goes outside to the playground. In that next area.
Okay, so were there any areas that were difficult to find a place for?
No.
Okay, so overall, pretty good. All right. So team one, any differences?
Our layout
mapping,
was
all that?
almost identical. The only thing that we had swapped was the library and the music room. And we just had, it was a,
We did go back and forth on that one,
We
we
did,
had
we did.
the same
Mark,
two rooms.
yeah.
we just kind of thought which one would work better and, yeah.
And which one was larger for supplies and things like that?
I don't know if this is jaded thinking, but I think it's worth mentioning that we should, before we send people break to registration or the waiting room, that there's maybe someone who could enforce
Oh,
that
the main
SOP at the main door.
That's what we
Just to
said,
kind of
yeah.
look at people coming in before they're officially registering.
Like a
just for
greeter
safety.
type thing.
Yeah, we're just to say, hey, these are the rules, here you go, you know, if you have a weapon, now is the time to go put it back in your car, and then they come in for the
So
registration.
that way you don't find like someone who's taking information in a room with someone who may or may not have a weapon and wants to keep it, that sort of situation.
Put it off at the door.
Yeah.
So we've set up
Right,
easels
exactly.
with all the rules on it.
Yes.
And so the greeter will say, okay, please read these two easels.
Yes.
Once you're done with that,
And then sign in the drop of your blood.
your first one.
Right.
You'd probably say you
My
don't
kids.
Leave your guns here.
Can I just play devil's advocate for a second?
Yeah.
If, as a longtime Acton resident, my whole life, I know that
And
there
that's a long
are
time.
some families in this town that don't read. So those sandwich boards are gonna mean nothing. You're gonna need somebody to actually have that conversation.
And that's the job of the greeter who's outside the door.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
you can't
inside.
just assume,
Yeah.
Inside too.
read that.
Yeah.
sign.
Yeah.
You're just carrying the information and you're dreaming about it for a few
Yeah,
days.
yeah, it's gonna be like totally ingrained and you're just gonna have to.
Like
say-
you're extra, like, hey,
Yeah,
this is what's
right.
happening, none of this.
Right.
And that's a good point. That's, same thing nationwide. Like, thinking about like the forums, you develop those, making sure there's not convoluted English in there, and making sure that
Right.
it's simple, people can
Simple,
understand that.
straightforward.
and everything
I
like
think
that.
pictures might do well too, just, with
It's
the
like that
red.
smiley
Yeah.
Like we did with
So, okay, great. And then the other one that I think, hopefully,
Leave your guns in your, leave yours with it.
and then hopefully the other thing too that really want to learn from is actually each other's different scenarios. So team one, I'm going to have you go first. I'm actually going to show team two what your scenario was. So for team one scenario, you have 30 people at the shelter, but only 20 cots. Additional cots are expected, but not until morning. So their role is to figure out how they allocate the cots, what they do for people without them, how do they communicate that decision, and how do they communicate that with Acton EMA. So please give me the report out.
Seniors and medical personnel, not medical personnel, but medical issue people, have a good conversation with people coming in and say, we're so glad you're here, we're going to make you comfortable. We have these mats, or get somebody to get in the car and go to Walmart and buy some air mattresses.
Thanks, Phil.
Phil's got to be
Yeah, there's a, Bill's got a $5
Just
grand.
leave your keys so I can
Right.
choose which vehicle I take.
That's okay. But seriously, floor mats, air mattresses, or inside, or you tell a bunch of kids, we're having a sleepover, and we can give them, blankets, and a pile of blankets, and we have to have enough blankets. I mean, we better have more than 20 blankets, that's for sure. And we just communicate it calmly with the facts, not, oh, we don't know when we're going to be here, we're just, this is it, we're gonna make you happy and comfortable. And communicate with EMA, whether it's the shift supervisor or the day manager. I'll get used to the real names soon. Call Phil. Call Phil. Get Phil.
I'd be there as much as I stay awake.
We'd still have to say, hey, Phil, we'd still have to call you, right?
No, we have to have more than one.
You're a
place, right?
commander.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if it's an ongoing disaster somewhere in the town, I'd be out there with
That's
the
right.
road commissioner or the fire chief
Right,
doing that aspect. But I still have the radio.
you have the radio.
And my phone goes.
Documentation.
But we'd also get that plan approved before we implement it.
The shelter plan?
The, you know, going out and buying air mattresses.
Right, yeah.
Making sure that he's okay with it.
Right, yeah, any purchasing money, things like that.
So these are
Our purchase
all the charge, so maybe.
Right.
This would all be in the SOP, right?
This is exactly, when we're done here, that's exactly what I'm gonna bring up. And we can make that anything we want. And that's why I'm hoping some of you folks volunteer to get together and write it. I mean, I can, but it's a lot more beneficial if we all have the input together on it. To me, that always works better. So yeah, whatever we want to put in there.
Perfect. Thank you, Team 1. All right, so Team 2, I'll tell you what their scenario was, Team 1. So when a well-intentioned community member shows up trying to help, but they haven't been vetted or trained and they're not on any roster. So how would they handle spontaneous volunteers or guests showing up? What are the safety protocols? How do you redirect or document their involvement? And then again, how do you communicate this to active EMA? So Team 2 is reporting out.
I think I drew the short straw on this one. I don't know if it's short or long, but. So a lot of these are kind of intertwined for us, right? So if someone shows up from the community, they want to help, the first thing we're going to do is take down their name, maybe check an ID, contact information, right? If we have enough volunteers, I don't know if you ever have enough volunteers, but, you know, well, we have enough people for now, we have your contact information, can we call you when we do need help? If we're in the position where we can take on help, we would then, our group decided that we would have them shelter. We'd have them shadow, thank you, I knew it's probably looking at us. We'd have them shadow one of the vetted volunteers who knows the plan, who knows the area, who knows what's going on. Maybe assist them until they're at a point where they're vetted by the shelter manager or the shift manager or Phil, where we're comfortable with them assisting on their own.
Never leave them alone.
Correct. So, the biggest rule in CERT, right, is you never do anything alone. You're always in a team of at least 2, right?
Make one comment on that. Another thing that you can do is make sure they're not client facing. So give them tasks.
Yes, we did bring that up a little bit, right? Like, so they're helping move stuff out of storage or into storage, or they're running with Phil to the store to buy air mattresses or whatever it is, right? And redirecting is kind of tied into that as well, right? Can we take your name and contact information? We'll call you when we have an opening where we think you'll fit in well, right? And at that point, we kind of understand what their interest might be, what they want to help with, because we gather all that information when they first come up and say, I want to help. And then communicating to acting EMA, again, it's call Phil, right? You start with your shift manager or your shelter manager. In their absence, then you reach out to Phil directly, but it kind of follows a chain link. And then it's well documented. So everyone knows everything, including the shift after you, and the shift after them, etc.
And if it's a guest, we're gonna get whoever is at the shelter that they're here to see, we're going to bring them to them. And then potential for them to go into the recreational area, pending that they either check in as a resident or a shelter stayee, I don't know the term, or that they have left. So that we have documentation for as long as they're there, regardless of what they decide they sign in when they get there.
Perfect. Wow, I mean, great. I mean, with a lot of these things too, it's, you have to kind of figure it out as you go, but, really enjoyed hearing those answers and everything. these situations, they could apply to other things. For example, a volunteer that could end up being the media, and if you have a process for, guests, that could apply to anybody. And then same thing with a shortage, shortage of cots, it could be a shortage of food, it could be a shortage of toiletries, something like that. How do you communicate that, because you may not have all the resources at once. So really enjoyed it. I think it's like one of the liveliest shelter discussions I've ever seen. So I think that's really great. And I want to hand it off to Phil because he wants to probably listen to his plans.
First of all, thank you for everybody that's here, whether you're a volunteer or whether you're not. And taking time to do this. Those of you that haven't formally volunteered, there's at least 3 people here I see. If you're willing to do that, please just email me at my town email address. It's right on the website. But just I'm so-and-so, here's my phone number, I'm volunteering. I greatly appreciate what everybody's doing for the towns. We've got a hell of a team from what I can see. And again, what this is the page out of the EOP I just refers to the shelter and warming centers. And it describes, one page, pretty straightforward. The yellow paragraph is referring to an SOP that is going to be a separate document. And I figured the best time to do this is right after the class, and we see who's here. We're all very well qualified. And I would prefer, unless you all say I have no interest in doing this as a group or whatever, is I give you this, resources and any other information you need is easy to find. That's kind of the fun part when I do things. And whoever's interested in working on this, writing the SOP, thinking about all the things we brought up today, the more detail we have in it without getting carried away, because it needs to be understandable and not too long, because people won't read things if it's too long. We can make this whatever we want. So anybody that's interested, here's the information to get started. So, and whatever you come up with as a group, whatever, just send it to me once in a while, an email as a draft or whatever. So I don't know if anybody's interested in being involved in this.
Just out of curiosity, do they have a standard SOP when you go into these?
Yes.
They do.
So I was going to comment on that, saying that we should take the, they have a Red Cross SOP. We can take that and tailor it to exactly what.
That's what I'm saying. There's so much information out there to start from. You don't need this to be my help. Oh, good. Oh, yeah. No, but I think as a group, it'll come out excellent. Just listen to everybody.
Do you need that back?
You actually have documented, yes, good part of it. So whoever the SOP writers could potentially use them.
Oh, great
Ladies,
point. And are you gonna do it in the Google Doc? Because then.
Just, if you have the list of where you can take it.
So we could just take the standard from the Red Cross, put it in the Google Doc, send it to your email, and then people can do it more on the email from this.
You already done the planning.
That's why I ran that. There's no review. That was only involved.
No, when you.
I don't really have good experiences with the shared loss in particular.
Like,
So
is your work will get like erased and.
everything just
This
gets
is actually, I
colorful
got
and it's
24 of
really
these
difficult
spots
to
from the
read.
company
I
up in
think
Fire up in northern Maine. Same
collective.
thing the county uses. They're about 24 pounds, all aluminum. First I was looking at the military ones. Luckily they ran out of them because you actually had to put it together. Not much, just, but it would take 2
Did
pages.
you put the 2 ends together on the
Yeah.
military?
Well, they can be a real.
Yeah, you can. So anyway, luckily they were out of those, so I got these and watched the video or whatever. But I have these stored across the street at the firehouse. There's 24 of these. Right now there's 50 disposable blankets. Because washing blankets is not realistic and not cost effective. So, and again, the ordinance takes care of the funding part. That would not be an issue. I would not get any pushback on what we needed from the select board, no doubt.
Are there ever like donations of like blankets or like things set up nearby for that sort of utility? Like extra blankets, cots, easy ups, those things, because we moved down from Portland, and I know Portland has like main needs and they allocate it, and I'm sure that it looks different bureaucratically, but I'm wondering, is there like any way to facilitate something like that? Not that it's needed on a mass scale, but just ongoing, you know?
That's something I can check with Jennifer, the town administrator, because they have certain programs going on already with neighbors, help neighbors and that kind of
Neighbors
thing.
helping.
That's a good idea though.
What do we use for the disposable blankets?
What are they?
Yeah. And that, like, I have a bunch of silver
I
blankets.
can't
at
remember
my
what,
home.
what the content
Okay.
percentages are, but
We went to the airplane one, okay.
exactly. Don't just one.
Yeah, it's like an airplane one.
Better than Red Cross.
I was gonna say, is there any like standard, like in terms of that, I know that there's like hygiene standards, of course, but just in moving here, and my mom is a seamstress, like, there have been so many quilts that have been donated, and all I can think is like, why not keep that local where we're operating now? Just, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think like an health officer would go, no, you can't do that, or, whatever issues people might have. But, yeah, that's one thing I haven't had time to get to is the donation side of things, but maybe someone would like to get involved in it.
Now they're just fundraising.
Volunteer.
That's another thing.
Okay, cool.
You volunteer, like,
The blanket.
I have something, like I can give blankets, so
Talk to Phil.
I agree
We
to
want you to
this
volunteer
and
to
and
do.
their email.
just give blankets, because I
I'll
have
send,
a long
I'll
short.
send a
You're gonna have a yard
email to
sale.
everybody who's already volunteered and anybody who adds to it. So if you three folks do volunteer, do that as quick as you can, and I'll just send out a mass email so you all have each other's email address, and be able to work on this initially. Because if
I
we're,
think we're all already on the thread from tonight, correct?
oh, from Chris.
Yeah, so we already are all on the
Good
thread.
job.
You just have to have it right.
Yeah, all right.
I think
And
we're all
Kelly,
running
I
around.
think you're the only one,
Yeah.
because I emailed you separately.
Yeah.
You have everybody's, but everyone has numbers.
Let me know. so we can-
Oh, I've got her number.
Is this
Oh,
an
let's
easy
go.
way and a hard way?
So, yeah, just as a wrap up, because I know we're a little bit past time, I can't thank you all enough for taking time out of your week to come here. I mean, I'm
Yeah, it's
inspired
easy
by
for
everything here in
everyone.
Acton. We have a really good EMA, like a great EMA director, and an amazing amount of experience here between everybody here. So really excited to see what everyone gets done here, and if there's any way you can help, please let us know. Our contact information is up here, so happy to do that. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.